Welcome everyone to Dowd Show. Today I have Katrin Van Kampen who's joined me from New Jersey. Katrin is an attorney from New Jersey and she's a human rights activist and advocate for the Yazidis and a co-chair of the United Nations Committee, a member of the Council for International Affairs. Welcome to Dowd Show, Katrin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dawood.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you, but I know that you are doing a lot of like pro bono work, a lot of volunteer with the underserved communities and also with the refugees in particular. So I would like to know more about you and your volunteer work with these communities.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think we've known each other now a couple of years, and I'm so proud of how beautifully you have adjusted to your life in America and all the successes that you've had. And I want to wish you, before I forget, just many, many more continued successes. And for me, you're an example of how well Yazidis do when they are allowed to really deploy their talents and educate, use their education, even have access to education, and then just develop themselves and be tremendous contributors to whichever countries they end up in. So I just wanted to say that before we started. So a little bit about me. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to grammar school and high school in New Jersey, and then I went and lived in the Netherlands for a year. And so I speak Dutch, and because I speak and understand Dutch, I can also understand a little German. So those are my two languages other than English that I speak. I don't speak Kurmanji, although I hope to learn at some point. And I don't speak Arabic. But when I was in college, so then when I came home from the Netherlands, I went to college. I lived in an international living and learning center at the Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And one of my friends who I met at the dorm was an Iraqi. And so that's when I started to learn about Iraq. And I'm still friends with him, this person. And so I've always followed Iraq for about, I want to say like 35 years. Obviously, the first Gulf War, you were probably maybe not even born then, I'm not sure. So the invasion by Saddam Hussein into Kuwait. And so I've always followed Iraq. When I was then I went to law school in New Jersey. When I was in law school, I interned, I should say, at the immigration clinic at the Center for Social Justice in Newark, New Jersey. And I started working with the immigrant community and asylum seekers. And I specialized during that time with women who were afflicted by violence in their home countries and fled to the United States. And so I'm not sure, Dawa, if you're familiar, but we have a law called the VAWA law. It's the Violence Against Women Act. And really in the 1990s, people began to be sensitized to the issue of violence against women. And the U.S. Congress passed a law that tried to help protect women who were subjected to violence. And we even have two visas now. I believe it's the T and the U, which are immigration visas that allow women who have been, for example, human trafficked, that they can apply based on that status. They can apply for a change, a change in their own status to stay in this country, in the United States. And so after I graduated from law school, I continued to work privately with women, mainly. I did work with some men who were subjected to violence in their home countries, and they were looking to seek asylum. I always did this work privately, Dawood. I never talked about it to anyone. I didn't. It was just something private. I thought it would be a good thing to do as a lawyer. But then in 2014, when I learned about the Yazidi situation, my whole life, my pro bono life really shifted to a totally different set of gears.
It's just amazing that you are giving a lot of like commitment, a lot of efforts, a lot of work, and all is volunteer to these underserved communities, refugees, and Yazidis in specific. And I know that you also received in last year or two a lot of awards for your work, and it's really amazing. Can you tell us how it feels when you are awarded for these services that you are doing?
Well, it's very humbling, to be honest with you. As I mentioned, I've been doing this work for it's now 20 plus years, right? 21 years. And I don't think any attorney or any human rights activist, unless they have bad intentions, do it for publicity reasons or to get an award. But what the awards do, Dawood, is they help bring attention to the clients who you're trying to serve. So, for example, if I'm doing pro bono work for an asylum seeker and they have a very specific set of circumstances in their country, it might not be that people are even aware of what's going on in a certain country. So an award gives me the opportunity to talk about the work, for example, that I was doing in Iraq and Syria, mainly humanitarian work. So I did receive the New Jersey Governor's Award. It was an Ambassador's Award back in 2018. I also received really just recognition from my high school in Princeton for this work. And then most recently, I was given 2 awards in December. One was the Human Rights Leader of the Year, or a Human Rights Leader of the Year from a humanitarian organization in New York. And then the President of Manhattan also gave me an award. And again, it's just an opportunity then for me to talk about, I like to talk about Yazidis, but I know there's also lots of other people who need our help too. So it's not
And
always exclusively Yazidis, but I do talk about you guys a lot.
yeah, and you are very well deserved, and it's a kind of like recognition and appreciation for the great work that you are doing for these underserved communities. So in 2014, you learned about the Yazidis, and since then you became a great advocate for the Yazidis. I know that a lot of people are not talking about the Yazidis. Not a lot of people are advocating for the Yazidis. What made you, or what drove you to do this?
So I consider myself a pretty well educated person. And I am ashamed to say that I did not know about the Yazidis before 2019. And I even knew about Iraq, for example, but I didn't know about Yazidis. And how I learned about the Yazidis was in August of 2014. I was working in New York City in a litigation room, with a bunch of other lawyers, and we're all, pretty well educated, well traveled, and we read on CNN that the Yazidis were stuck on Mount Sinjar and that ISIS had surrounded them. And I turned to one of my colleagues and I said, "Who are the Yazidis?" And then I just followed the situation and I put a Google alert for Yazidis. And I didn't know you could spell it like 5 different ways, of course, but it did work. You have the YA, the YE, the Z. So there's all kinds of ways you can spell Yazidi, but nonetheless. And then I just started to learn more and more. And I know that Nadia Murad and another Yazidi woman got a European prize that was very prestigious. And that week, I wrote a poem about Yazidis, and I think I've shared that poem with you. Yeah. And I was just deeply, deeply moved by their plight and also horrified as a human being and as a woman that a terrorist group, and this was also around the same time that Boko Haram had captured hundreds of girls and stolen them from their families. So there was a whole campaign, Bring Back Our Girls, for the Boko Haram girls. And Michelle Obama was involved in that, and many other famous people who had a platform to try to influence the return of those girls. And really not that much was being done for the Yazidis, but I was honestly just horrified as a human being that in this time, such horrific violence could be specifically directed at a group of people because of their religious background and their ethnicity.
How would you describe the Yazidi situation at this moment after 7 years?
You're using the proper word. It's horrific. It's the worst possible situation you can imagine for a set of human beings. And it's an unfair situation. And I'll tell you why it's unfair. There was an occupying force in Iraq that essentially created or helped create the conditions for a civil war, not unlike what we saw when Yugoslavia broke up. And so you had an occupying force, and we knew, the United States, I should say, and the other countries, that there were certain groups operating in Iraq that were very dangerous. And if they had the opportunity to come to power or to use military operations and terrorist operations, that they were going to inflict a tremendous amount of damage. Now, whether folks knew that there would be a genocide committed, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. However, there were certainly indications that that might occur. So when this occupying force then removes itself after being involved in Iraq for more than a decade, of course that's going to create a power vacuum that essentially creates a perfect storm for violence to occur, sectarian violence to occur. And there was already sectarian violence going on in Iraq. So Iraq, really, you have two parts, right? You have the northern part and you have the southern part. So in the southern part, even during the initial occupation of the United States and the Great Britain, for example. So Great Britain was primarily in charge of that southern part, and you had tremendous violence already going on there. And then in the northern part, where you have a lot of religious minorities, such as the Christians and the Yazidis, that was a little bit quieter until and I'm not saying that it was quiet. I'm not saying there was no violence. But what I'm saying is you didn't have the type of violence that you then later came to see when ISIS came, really it had been developing its caliphate for a long time. And then with that power vacuum, when those troops left, and you had the civil war in Syria, so that gave the ISIS an opportunity to capture part of southern, I would say southeastern Syria, and then some parts of northern Iraq. And then they were marching, down to Baghdad. And, we had people in the U.S. government saying that ISIS was a JV team. ISIS was never a JV team. They were killers. They are killers. So now you're 7 years after this horrific violence. Most humanitarian foundations have gone, right? You have a situation where you still have hundreds of thousands of Yazidis displaced from their homes. Some of them are living in as what they call IDPs, which are internally displaced persons. So technically they're not refugees because they are in their country of birth. But nonetheless, their situation is terrible because their homeland is completely destroyed. So Sinjar City, their homes are destroyed. In Iraq, you don't necessarily have the same property rights. So you could show up in, 7 years later and say, this was my farm. And somebody says, prove it. And you may have neighbors who are hostile to you who've taken your property, right? And so you have every single Yazidi family has been touched by this tragedy, whether they're part of the Iraqi community or the Syrian Yazidi community, or they're part of the diaspora, which lives in the, Russian Caucasus or Western Europe or the United States or Australia. And now you also have a situation in Iraq where you have different militias operating in northern Iraq. There again, it's very dangerous. You have external forces having military operations in Iraq that are illegal, by the way. And so you have pretty much the worst situation anyone could contemplate. And no one is talking about the Yazidis. And so I will continue to talk about the Yazidis until I feel like I don't have to anymore.
In your point of view, like, how do you see this? Like, how do you view as an attorney?
So in terms of the Yazidis, what people do need to know is that according to your historians, there used to be, from my understanding, like 25 million Yazidis in the Middle East, right? And over the centuries, your people have suffered, some say 70, 74 genocidal attacks against them. So that now in the world, you have about 1 million Yazidis, right? So think of that number going down from 25 million, if that number is correct, to 1 million today. So you've lost basically more than 90% of the Yazidi population during these genocidal campaigns. That in and of itself is a reason why Yazidis deserve international protection. But you're not the only religious minority that needs international protection. And the Yazidi case is a very important case because it can also serve for other religious minorities. For example, the Uyghurs in China, the Rohingyas, right, in Southeast Asia, they are similarly suffering something, a genocidal campaign against them. In terms of the judicial acts, I believe that the judiciary, so I'm part of the judiciary, right? I'm a lawyer, has failed in its responsibilities, in its most basic responsibilities, to prosecute, to, first of all, collect evidence, to investigate, to bring prosecutions when you have sufficient evidence against an individual, or, for example, corporate actors, or even governmental actors. So we've failed the Yazidis. And what happens, Dawood, when you don't, as a judiciary, both internationally and nationally, whether it's Germany, the Netherlands, France, doesn't matter, right? What happens is you embolden criminals and terrorists who then see that there is impunity. In other words, they can do things and they're not going to be punished for them. So there's nothing stopping them from doing this someplace else. So there's nothing stopping, for example, Canadian or a US person or a British person from being inspired by, let's say, some terroristic propaganda, going over, and in the case of ISIS, it was their caliphate, fighting for the caliphate, and then getting there and saying like, oh, this isn't what I saw on YouTube. This isn't as happy of a place that I saw on Instagram or Facebook. I want to turn around and go home, even though maybe for a period of months that person has participated with that terrorist group, and maybe they committed crimes, war crimes, maybe they took slaves, and then they fly home and they try to slip back into their society and go to work and go to school. And if somebody says, weren't you in Syria? Like for some of these jihadi women, and they say, oh, I was just washing the dishes over in Syria. I was just doing the laundry. I didn't know what my husband was up to. And we let him get away with it. Every country, every single country that's been a member of the coalition has let this happen. And Germany is the only country that has started to do trials. And I hope that Germany serves for all of the other countries that were part of the coalition of the willing, which occupied Iraq, that they start to own up to their responsibilities to the victims of these crimes. What is horrifying for Yazidis, a couple of other things that are going on, is that there's been sympathy for some of these individuals who went to Syria and Iraq to fight for the caliphate. So a Yazidi victim, right, gets less sympathy and less support, judicial support, than folks who participated in these crimes and perpetrated them. And they come back and they say, well, I was brainwashed, or I didn't really participate in this, or yes, I gave my husband $60,000 so that we could go to right? So we had an American woman from Indiana who went, she paid tens of thousands of dollars. It was her money used, and he held, I believe, 2 Yazidi slaves, a boy and a girl. And so we are finding ourselves in this upside down world where the perpetrators are treated better than the victims.
Can you tell us about the campaign and how it could be benefiting the Yazidis?
So thank you for raising the campaign. The website is the Yazidi Genocide Justice Campaign.org. It is sponsored by, I believe, 8 to 10 Yazidi organizations. Essentially, the Yazidi leadership, the global leadership, and you have many wonderful, wonderful leaders, including yourself, Dawood, who are calling for justice. And so you have Yazidi leaders at Yazda, Yazidi Human Rights Organization out of Canada, the Luftbrücke out of Iraq, out of Germany. You have Dr. Jan Kilazan, who is a Yazidi from Germany, Wahab Hasso from the Netherlands. He has an organization called Netherlands Helps Yazidis that provides humanitarian aid. Voice of the Yazidis from France, the Frida Abbas organization from Germany. And if I missed any, including you also have the Yazidi Legal Network from Amsterdam, the Yes organization from the United Kingdom, which is Anne Nerona, the Yazidi Emergency Support. So these organizations have come together and supported a report that was conducted by a team of investigators, international lawyers, and human rights activists from Europe and North America who've been researching the role of technology companies in helping ISIS spread its terroristic propaganda for more than a decade, in which you had tens of thousands of foreign nationals be inspired by this propaganda. They then traveled to Iraq based on the promises that they were going to be paid and live in this caliphate. And the caliphate included taking slaves. And what we know is that Yazidi women were traded on certain social media platforms. We also know that ISIS fighters joked about trading Yazidi women on certain social media platforms. We know that also ISIS had thousands and thousands of social media accounts across many different platforms, and they were permitted to post millions of media impressions of their propaganda. And the cumulative effect of this is that their propaganda went worldwide. It inspired people to go to the Middle East and fight for them. And part of their prize were women and children. And the sick part, the worst, it's not the worst part of it, but the way these apps are developed now, some of them are also, you have the behind the scenes messengering system. So you may see, a Yazidi family may see their loved one posted online, and then they're getting the messages from the jihadists, you can buy your child back for $30,000. And then that Yazidi family, who's already destitute, so impoverished, has to borrow money, go into debt to get their loved one back. So think of it as a process of 360, that the same awful technology that helped create this situation is the same technology that the families had to use to deal with, to negotiate to get their loved one back. I can't imagine a more horrific human situation.
As an attorney, do you believe like a justice could be found for the Yazidis, like in any time in future, or if it's possible, like how it could happen?
Well, we have a case in France that is against the cement company that was, I'm not sure if you've heard about this case, but a cement company that was buying cement from ISIS, believe it or not. And the Supreme Court of France has said that that case can go forward. And that's really important. Just like the cases in Germany where you now have some convictions of jihadists who committed crimes, that they've been convicted, what happens is that these cases start to set a precedent. And once you have a couple of cases that have gone forward, there's hope that other cases will go forward. So the campaign that is out, the Justice Campaign, is essentially, a report has been issued. It's published on the website. It's very, very detailed. It's 100+ pages, and there's over, I believe, 200 footnotes on that report, all pointing to various scholars from around the world who've all come to the same conclusion. So there's no collusion here. Nobody got together with, let's say, 100 different researchers around the world and said, let's come to all the same conclusion. That's not even possible. But they all came to the same conclusion that there was widespread use by ISIS of these global platforms. And basically what the Yazidi leadership has said is, because they know that this is true, every Yazidi leader who has read the report has said the same thing. What is in the report is what happened. And that's really important, because if folks read the report and said, this isn't what happened, then you'd have a problem. But the Yazidi leadership has said, no, this is correct. And so what the report does is it is asking governments around the world to investigate this, thoroughly investigate it. The fact that the report is published at all is so important, Dawood. And I think that the Yazidi leadership, for which we should all be very grateful, will spend the next year or 2 years or 5 years fighting for this.
And thank you so much for your fight. And I also read the report. It's just like it was something that I myself I was waiting for something like that, like an official report that demanding the justice for the Yazidis, and it's just something that we need at this point because we don't have a lot of research going on. We don't have a lot of investigation. I also learned that Sweden and also France, I believe, they have a team of investigators that is collecting the evidence from Iraq and Syria for the Yazidi genocide. You have been a friend with Yazidis. Do you have any Yazidis who really inspired you? I know that you keep fighting for Yazidis, so there should be some people who made an impact on you or inspired you from the Yazidi community.
Well, all Yazidis inspire me, of course. You inspire me, Dawood. Murad Ishmael inspires me. Leilu Kuleda, Haider Elias, Hadi Pir, Nadia Murad, Farida Abbas. I've read their books. All Yazidi women. I think we all need to literally worship the ground that Yazidi women walk on. There are so many Yazidis who inspire me, and I'm so deeply proud of all of you that you continue, despite how dangerous it is, to exercise your courage muscle and just fight for your people. And I think if all of you didn't fight for yourselves, you would not attract people like Amal Clooney to fight for you. And and I can tell you from being involved with the Yazidi Legal Network in Amsterdam, when you show up for the meetings, there's like 40 to 60 attorneys who are all there, human rights activists. They care so passionately about this issue. And I think it's because of the Yazidis. I think, you guys are just like adorable. You really can't like understand how it is. First of all, that like Iraq doesn't appreciate you, like just starting right there, right? If you look at what we learn about history and you look at the Bible and how important the Bible is, right? Both to the Jewish people and to the Christians. And you look at Babylon, you look at the start of civilization. That was where you guys live, and your religion, from what I understand, again, I'm not a historian, but my understanding is that Yazidism predates the 3 Abrahamic religions. So Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So it's older than those religions. You have historic shrines that are cultural heritage. So Lalesh, for example. How is it possible that anyone would want to destroy a Yazidi shrine? I don't understand these things. So I think it is both the people, but also the cultural heritage that is so important. And what I think we're seeing in the world is a total kind of ambivalence towards the destruction of historic cultural heritage. So if you look at Raqqa in Syria, and there were archaeological, historic, such significant monuments in Syria that have been utterly destroyed. We will never see these things again. And, you see this destruction going on in the Amazon, where you have tribes living in the Amazon and nobody cares. And this is not right. We all have to care about the destruction of people and of cultural heritage and historic heritage. And that's part of my mission too, that we need to stop being so ignorant, and we need to stop being so indifferent to violence and destruction.
Thank you so much for your words. Thank you so much for being inspired by Yazidis and your fight for the Yazidis. And we appreciate you and we appreciate your work. What's your last message for the international community in terms of helping the underserved communities and in particular like the refugees?
So here again, we are facing one of the largest refugee crises since the World War II. Today, you have 80 million refugees. We have 150 million people who are homeless. And every second, another person is displaced. We can pretend that this problem does not exist and that we do not want, as the West, for example, or wealthier countries, we don't want people who are fleeing war and poverty and famine to be on our doorstep. But pretending that this is not happening is not going to stop people from coming. I don't like that there's so much anti-refugee and anti-immigrant sentiment in our world. And I'm afraid, Dawood, if we don't work towards changing that mentality, that we're not going to have a good outcome. So that's part of my message too. We all have to play our part, and we all can play a part. And, they say in Judaism, to save a life is to save the entire world. And I think each of us can play a role in saving lives. And as human beings, we're called to do that. It's part of our obligation to one another. So I just really hope that I can encourage everyone, even refugees themselves, to try to help each other in this journey that we're all taking. It's not right to see refugees drowning in the Mediterranean Sea or the English Channel. It is not right to see people on our southern border in the United States drowning in the Rio Grande or dying in the desert. So I hope that we can all be more compassionate. We can try to build a fair global community, because at the end of the day, Dawood, we're all connected. It's one world, it's one sky, it's one ocean, and we have to try to help each other.
Thank you so much for your great message. And I also share my voice with your message, your great message that we are here all equal and we should help each other. Thank you so much for being on Dawood's show. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, your pro bono work that you continue working like for over 20 years. It's just amazing. And for being a great friend with the Yazidis and advocate.
Thank you, Dawood. I just also want to say one more thing, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I really think that every Yazidi who's in the West has an obligation to help Yazidis in the Middle East. And they are your brothers, they are your sisters. And I know that you are a monolithic religion, that you can't convert to Yazidism, so you have to keep this in this community alive and vibrant. And I would really encourage you to keep your community, be proud of being Yazidi. And, you know, if you have the opportunity to fall in love with each other and get married and make lots of babies, I totally encourage you to do that. And I also want you to know, as an American, that, you know, for all Yazidis who live in America, America is your home. And I hope that you feel at home in this country and you consider, like, your homeland is obviously Iraq, but America is your home too. And if you're in Germany, Germany is your home. And if you're in Holland, Holland is your home. So, you know, the future might not look like the past, but that may not necessarily be a bad thing. And just know that you're like you're an American now, Dawood. America is your home. And I hope that you feel at home in your country.
And I feel totally I'm home, and I feel American, and also I feel like the obligation to be like a true American who believe in liberty, in freedom, in justice for everybody. And thank you so much for your words, for everything. Thank you, Pat.
You are welcome. It's my honor. Thank you, Dawood.